Welcome to M&A Unpacked, the weekly show where we bring on experts in MSP, M&A, case studies from those who have gone through or are going through the process, and top M&A and business minds to help you maximize the value of your MSP, whether you're buying, selling, or just trying to improve your business. Make sure to subscribe to the Kaseya YouTube channel so you know when new episodes drop, and you can even save the M&A Unpacked playlist for easy access. Today, I am joined by Mike Chaput, CEO of Endsight. Mike, thanks for joining us.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's really good to see you again. We had a conversation a week or no, 2 weeks ago now. We had Thanksgiving last week, so we chatted, and it was I found very interesting to hear about your journey as an MSP and what you've accomplished, and you've accomplished quite a bit. I'm not going to spoil it. I'd like to go back to the start, and tell us how you started in the business. You've been doing it for over 20 years. You've built quite a business. You have grown without backing of private equity. You've kind of done this all yourself, and take us back and then bring us forward.
Yeah, well, it's been a long journey. It's like you mentioned, it's Endsight was founded in 2004, so it's we're in 20 over 20 years or 20 years ish. And before that, my co-founder and I also ran a VAR, a value-added reseller. So in 2004, we kind of a couple guys, bootstrap. We kind of collaborated on our network and went to market with an MSP offering pretty early. In fact, we were a super early adopter of Kaseya. I want to say that was like 2005, but we've been a Kaseya partner for 19 years or something like that. A really early adopter of ConnectWise. Back then, they were the only PSA in town, and we kind of did sales, found customers, built a practice, and we've done 4 acquisitions along the way. And so that was kind of the genesis of this conversation. And we've grown. We've been on the Inc. 5000, I want to say 9 times. It's something like that. We're about 150 employees now, a little over 35, like around 35 million in revenue, total revenue. And kind of I'd call it industry best practice or industry best margins as well. So it's been and we've funded this all along out of profits and traditional institutional debt, along with seller financing, along with our own cash flow. So we haven't had to take in any external capital along the way. And so that's kind of the really broad view of where we've been the last 20 years. And then maybe I'll leave it to you to kind of dig into any of the specifics you think your viewers would be interested in.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, that's quite a bit of growth. A lot of folks be very envious of that, and to hear that you did that on your own without private equity backing you. And you said you did four acquisitions total at this point.
Yes, sir. Let's see. The first one was kind of, it was kind of, I don't want to say luck, but it was basically, at that time, we were going to an Ingram Micro networking conference twice a year, something called Venture Tech. And there was a local MSP who was in that group who we just made friends with by being friendly and peer sharing and that kind of stuff. And they had an idea for a new business and didn't know what to do with their old business. And we just got to talking, and we kind of put together a financial model that worked for both of us, and we executed it. I want to say that was something like 8 employees or 9 employees came along with that acquisition. And that was kind of our first foray into it. And it ended up working out really well. I mean, we actually still have plenty of those, several of those employees are still key members of our team, if you can believe that. And a lot of those customers are still in our portfolio, if you can believe that. And so that kind of got us interested in the M&A market. And a couple years later, this is kind of also interesting how this went down. It was probably 2 or 3 years later, somebody in the local market who heard that we bought that company, who I'd never even met before, called me and asked me for a meeting. And I took the meeting and they kind of said, "Hey, I've got this business." They didn't have a they didn't have an NDA or anything. They just threw down a profit and loss statement and said, "This is my business and I kind of want to sell it and I want to sell it right now and here's the price that I want for it." And I just kind of like right there, I did the analysis and was like, "We can make that work." And we transacted that deal almost like 30 or 45 days. And then, that owner was like walking the Pacific Crest Trail. I don't know if you know what that is, but it's like a super famous hike from like Mexico to Canada that runs through the Sierras. And like he did the thing, did like a 90-day transition plan, and then he was hiking. That's what he wanted to do. And he had accumulated a bunch of commercial and residential rental real estate over the years and just kind of wanted out of the MSP business. That was smaller, but it wasn't too much smaller. It was like 5 employees. Um, and there we hit our second one. And then, like time moves on and I kind of thought, well, this is a good idea to just kind of make friends with local competitors and it kind of worked at one time and it was kind of my nature anyway. And so I started meeting with various MSP owners in the community. Most of them went nowhere. I mean, they didn't go nowhere. I made friends and I traded information and I have people who I like but they didn't lead to some kind of transaction. But one of them, we hit a partnership they had a partnership of three and one of the partners wanted to retire and they were kind of in a situation where they were either going to buy the third partner out or they were going to sell, but the other one was really close to retirement too. And so, we just got to talking and we I told them about the structure and how the other ones worked. And that was interesting enough. And we hit our third one. And then the final one, this one was a little bit even more interesting and convoluted. I've been in this peer group. It's called the True Profit Group, and that peer group had a member of that group for almost a decade who I'd got to know really, really well. We share financials and everything. They had been in that group, so we were very familiar with each other. And they had called me a couple years earlier and asked me to kind of look at a private equity offer with them, and I did that, and I kind of evaluated the offer that they had from the private equity. They elected not to sell, and then 2 years later, I own this, or I say my business partner and I own this commercial building, and we just got this ridiculously insane offer on it that was going to create a pile of money with which we didn't know what to do with, and I just kind of said, well, what if we used it to try to do another MSP acquisition? So I just kind of said, hey, are you still interested in selling to this company in the peer group? And they said, well, we could be. So we kind of talked through valuations and we talked through transactions and then we acquired the fourth one, and that was 3 years ago. So those were the four. They all came through networking essentially, and they were born out of trust and friendship. So I think the first moral of that story is it pays to be generous with your time and your information, and to try to help people accomplish their goals. And if you do that sincerely, then you have some friends in the universe who trust you and who are willing to talk about bigger and bigger things with you. And that's kind of how those things emerge. So if you're interested in selling, not a bad idea to make some friendships. And if you're interested in buying, not a bad idea to make some friendships and to network. So
Yeah, that's great advice. I'm a big fan of networking. I grew two businesses myself with that. I met the people who I am in business with now through that, and that's what brought me to Kaseya. So it's worked really, really well for me. And I mean, I can't say enough about it. Everybody should be out there networking.
it's
So it's not,
interesting. I mean, if you think about it, like if somebody in your local market, a competitor who you're kind of familiar with, or maybe not familiar with, but when you went to their website, they seemed interesting. If they called and reached out and invited you to a lunch, I mean, you have a choice. You can say yes, or you could say no. I think most people recognize what I'm saying and then they say yes. So then you have a second choice, which is you can look through LinkedIn and find people in your competitors. You can invite them to lunch, or you can just do your normal day to day. And so I guess my takeaway here is if you invite some people to lunch and not necessarily with a specific agenda of buying their firm so much as understanding where they're at, what they're about, what their business does. Is there any way to collaborate while they're in business together? And then, then time kind of just does its thing. I had the advantage, Mike, in that, I started my first IT services business in 2000, and I was 24 years old. So, I just kind of waited it out. Like everybody who I had grown up with got old and retired. And I got old too, but not quite as old because I was just so early to the game. And so a lot of these relationships I built over the years, kind of corresponded with somebody's just personal desire to leave the business. But I think it just pays to connect and um, and again, I want to point out with it, we'll say a sincere interest to try to get to know people, what they're interested in. Maybe they're interested in understanding the market a little bit better, and then you have a choice whether you want to share openly things like what you charge and how you do agreements, or whether you want to keep that all close to the vest. I always chose, it was I don't know, controversial, but I always chose to just kind of be open book. Like, it's like if I eventually the customer is going to get both of our prices, and if I'm more expensive, then I've got to win that customer on value anyway, whether you undercut me or not. And if you're trying to like edge me out by $5 and win, like it's like if I can't value sell above whatever you're going to undercut my pricing, then I probably don't deserve that client. So I never really concerned myself with trying to keep everything super tight. So one of the things I would do in these meetings is I would share openly and freely, about how we thought about business, and that was valuable to a lot of people, and it built trust. And so that's the other kind of point to it is you have a choice where you can keep everything guarded because you think you have some kind of really unique competitive advantage. But the reality is the information's out there. People know what the service should cost for premium service, for low cost leaders. Whatever you think is your secret sauce isn't that hard to get. And really, I truly believe that, operational execution is everything. So, knowing what we charge at Endsight isn't going to help you that much. And even if knowing how we, let's say, manage a process isn't going to help you that much, because its execution is it's going to help to some degree, but
Understood. Yeah, no, totally agree with you on that. Well, let's talk about what lessons you've learned along the way, from integrating acquired companies. I know we've talked about this, and I know you'd mentioned um, why rushing into changes can backfire. So I'd love to hear about that.
well, so the first acquisition we did, the one I queued up, one of the things at that point in time, we had worked really, really hard to develop very fast response time, and it was a huge competitive advantage. So we had developed enough scale, and we had gotten kind of into the weeds on something called queuing theory. So you can imagine that a grocery store has people coming into the store, and then they have agents checking them out, and it's actually possible to mathematically calculate the wait time of a shopper on the basis of how long it takes to check them out, how many are coming into the store. And so we kind of looked at it and we're like, how many people do we have to staff based on our ticket clearing rates in order to be able to have our lines? And we found out interesting things. It was like, well, it really depends on the time of day. Like we get a lot of calls on Monday from 11 to 12. So we were like really interested in trying to how do we time shift work, and so that we can keep a lean machine. But the bottom line was we got to 5 minute response times, and we were really proud of this because this was back in like, I want to say '08 or something like that, when most people, what they were doing is they were calling a what we call level zero, or like an administrator. That person was answering the phone. Then they were creating a ticket inside their system, which they'd assign to an engineer. And sometimes it would take a full day. Sometimes it would take an hour. Sometimes it would take hours. But the response times to get to an engineer to solve the problem were really long. So we had this big competitive advantage by developing very rapid support. But it did require calling a phone queue and waiting up to 5 minutes in the phone queue. So when we acquired the firm, like the people, the previous owners who were selling the MSP practice, they looked at our operations as superior to theirs. They're like, man, we wish we could respond in 5 minutes like you guys do. And that's so great. And that's amazing. And so when they transitioned, they went ahead and um, put support in our model. And they told their customers like how amazing the new service was going to be. And it totally set us up for failure. For one, um, the customers didn't like waiting in the 5 minute queue. They got on a whole, they were used to like a really sweet person answering their phone, knowing them by name. And they liked that so much that they were willing to wait the hour for support. And then of course, they would talk to an engineer that they were more familiar with, that they were more intimate with when they finally talked to somebody versus kind of a faceless voice across the phone. So when they got this new experience, they weren't actually happy with it because the expectation wasn't set up properly. I mean, when we onboard a client, we basically tell them exactly what's going to happen, and we basically explain it all. They're totally prepared for that level of support. They get it. They like it. It's what they purchased. But their customers purchased something different. And so what we learned was like even if you think it's better, the customer doesn't automatically think it's better. And we also learn that you want to set expectations very reasonably versus really high because you're like, oh, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. Of course, all you're going to do is disappoint the client. So the typical expectation that we set after that was like, hey, nothing's going to change immediately. You know, over time, there could be some benefits that you're going to get from the bigger overall. But we'll talk to you about that over time. But in the meantime, you're going to get exactly what you have. And you could think about integration. So when you're taking two separate companies and putting them together, you could think about there's a portfolio of work that needs to get done. You need to consolidate, let's say, HR, because like people need to be paid on day one. So like the first thing you have to do is get people that were employed here, employed by you on payroll. Okay, then the second thing is like, well, we need to have financial reporting and profit and loss, kind of has to get integrated fairly quickly because it gets really annoying managing two books. And then you might say, well, we need systems and tools to be integrated. And then you might say, you can keep going down the list. It's like somewhere along the way, you want to integrate your operations. And that means you want to deliver services the same way across all the customers. But that's something that doesn't need to be done day one, and I don't think should be done day one. And it's debatable whether it should be done in 30 days or 60 days. And it depends on the size of the acquisition and the state of the customers. But in our case, each of these decisions about when they should be integrated were all part of a project plan. And then, you think you can even want to integrate brands because like they're used to paying a firm. They're used to seeing a logo. So you have the one company operated by another. You're trying to expose them to both brands, and then eventually you take away the one brand that they're used to. So there's a methodology to kind of move the customer into doing business consistently with the set of people and the set of operational process. And it could take months. It could take years if the acquisition is big enough. But ultimately, then there's a whole element of culture, and we talked about that too. It's like, how do you take two different cultures and kind of, smush them together? And I've got a lot of opinions about that, but that's also kind of a component. And you want to be able to do that if you want to keep your key employees, and that's ultimately what the customers are buying. So you really want to focus on those things as well.
Interesting. We talked also, I want to bring up the critical role of a shared mission you talked about and the values in ensuring M&A success that have to do with that. But talk to me about the critical role of shared mission.
Well, okay, so there's a lot of MSPs. I don't want to paint with too broad of a brush, but the marketplace is generally it's like an IT professional who is kind of, let's say, pretty darn good at their job, and something happens. There's a whole book on this. I'm trying to remember what they call it, the entrepreneurial seizure. What's that? What's the book that? Well, I'll think of it in a minute. And they have an entrepreneurial seizure or something that maybe they lose a job or they get frustrated and they start a business. But because they're really good at it, their customers like them, and then they get a few referrals, and it's more work that they can do, and they hire a person, and then eventually it becomes a team, and they're kind of off to the races with a little business. That's kind of like the typical IT provider, and they're generally speaking, they're less than 10 employees, or somewhere around there, and they have some good customers, and some really good people. In fact, some of the best people we have, I mean, some of our, if you look at our portfolio of workers, a lot of our senior people and leadership came from some of these acquisitions. So one of the things that these small organizations do is they hire great people who work really hard, who make great customer relationships, and that's their key asset. And they have a real familial culture. They're friends with each other. They know each other really well, and you could think of the connection as affiliatory. It's like they're bonded as human beings. But we're 150 people, so the people who are working, like, I genuinely think employees at Endsight, maybe they like me. We spent time together in orientation and stuff like that, but it's not like what it was when they worked at a 10-person organization. I mean, it can't be like that with the CEO. So they will have hopefully a great relationship like that with their direct manager, because their manager is only going to manage 10 people or something like that, but they're not going to have that relationship with their CEO. So what they get in return from that is the CEO of a company of my size has to create a compelling vision, a compelling mission, and a compelling set of shared values that everybody operates with. So that while they work with people in Endsight, they know what behaviors are acceptable and what aren't, so that they can exhibit those behaviors or opt out. And that if people are going, so at Endsight, for example, our first core value is respect and connect. So that means that we believe that everybody gets to be treated with respect, and that we're going to do a lot to foster connection, and that if people respect each other and are connected, we're actually going to win more in the marketplace. So like that's part of our shared value. And so it might really relate to what they had before, or it might not. I mean, you can imagine that some environments people are arguing and yelling and swearing a lot and all that kind of stuff. Like that just doesn't work at Endsight. So if that was a behavioral norm at the previous provider, like it might not work, because like that, we're not going to change our culture to accommodate that. And if somebody, even if they were a brilliant engineer and they came in, but they were really disrespectful to their colleagues, no matter how good of an engineer they are, they're not going to work at Endsight. And so, when I think about the vision, so all right, so the vision piece is like, what are we trying to build together? So it's like, well, maybe I'll say it this way. And sorry for circularly talking about this.
This is great.
I,
No,
I believe that we live in an economic system where people need money to live. I mean, I don't think it can really be disputed. Like, if you want to buy food and pay for a home or an apartment, like, you need money. And so people will work for that reason only, because they have to have it. They might even not like what they do, or they might not like who they work with. And you've probably met people like that. But because they need money to live, they'll work for it. I think people would rather get money doing something they enjoy. So that would be like the motive of play. It'd be like they get into flow state with their work. They're solving puzzles. They like the process of what they're specifically doing. It time passes fast, and they like it. The other one is purpose. So play, purpose, and potential are the three kind of chief motivators. So like the purpose is like, hey, the work I do actually matters to people. Because it's like nothing is more soul sucking than going in and working really hard and nobody even notices. It's like, digging a hole and filling it back up and getting paid. There's no purpose by it, and there's no purpose by it, and it can be it can be really soul sucking. So the leader of an organization has to create a compelling purpose. Like, what are we trying to do here that's actually going to help humanity in some way, and it's going to have some kind of impact, and then recognize people, and then make them feel seen and heard at their job. So this is like a really important part of it. And then the potential is also, it's like, how are they growing and learning as individuals, and how is our organization growing and becoming something really interesting, and how are they going to be a part of that? And so if you look at like what the job of leadership is, it's to make sure that the business is successful enough to secure payment of all your people, like that's a necessity, that all the families depend on it. But it's it's what employees need, but they want a bunch more. They want to be part of a community. They want to do work that matters. They want to do work that's interesting. They want to be recognized for that work. They want to have impact on other humans in their life and know that that impact is good. And so like these things are all like, this is all part of the vision and value stack that has to be dealt with by a leader. And as it relates to M&A, a lot of times the smaller the organization is, the less they depend on those tools. And the more they would depend on something like an affiliative relationship and a familial like relationship with the staff. And the larger the organization comes, the more they're going to depend on these other accesses for leadership. So you have to determine whether there's alignment. And you know, like I mentioned, we run a very respectful culture. So that doesn't mean that that's the only way to be successful, but it's the only way to be successful at Endsight, because that's, we drew a line in the sand. Like that trumps talent. Like we could have a very talented person that's gonna, like, you know, run around and condescend to people, and it doesn't work in our culture. So it's like, if that's the culture there and we can observe it some way before we transact, we'll say no, because we know we're going to lose all their key players and then all the clients that depend on those key players, and it will all fall apart.
Interesting. That's a perfect segue into, you know, you're talking to the seller community now. So, you know, talk about what you look for when you are, you know, and I'd love to hear like what your plans are going forward with acquisitions, or if you're still doing the same thing with just waiting, kind of networking and seeing what happens, or if you're more active now going out and looking for things, and what you're looking for.
So yeah, great question. So there's a I actually delivered this presentation at a Kaseya conference in Ireland, where I where the meat of my presentation is to help people think about their company as a set of cash flows, as a set of future cash flows. So you can think of a business as um, maybe even an infinite set of cash flows. And how would you calculate those infinite set of cash flows? Well, typically what you do is you'd say, well, here's how much I've made over time in previous years and what my growth rate is. And I'd use that information to kind of project the future. So now I have this future cash flows, and I would use, let's say, a cost of capital. So you can imagine, well, what if I just invested in the market? I might get, you know, 10% return or something like that. So the future cash flow has to be at least 10% more than the present cash flow just to be equal. And then I would discount those future cash flows to a net present value. This is, you know, if you're interested in discounted cash flow analysis, you can go on to YouTube or something like that, and somebody will teach it to you. But I introduced this concept and said, hey, here's how you think about your business as a discounted set of cash flows. So what are the factors? It's like, well, how much you made, that's one factor. But also another important factor is, are you growing or not? Because if you're not growing, then you're actually, your discounted cash flows might, you know, get less over time. So you want to make sure you have some growth. And then the other thing that happens is like, okay, well, I see some companies and they're saying, hey, I make this amount of money. It's like, well, we call it earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, amortization, EBITDA. It's like, well, this is my EBITDA. It's like, well, what constitutes the EBITDA? Like, how much is there for management and administrative cost inside of that, inside of what you've released? It's like, oh, well, I didn't include my salary at all. It's like, well, somebody's got to do the work. Well, I put my salary as 100,000. It's like, well, I can't hire somebody for 100,000 to manage 10 people. Like I have to pay 120,000, you know, or whatever. So you get into this thing where, what is that number? And what I end up doing as a potential buyer is I say, look, I don't like how much you're spending on sales and marketing, how much you're spending on managerial administration isn't so important as what you should be spending in those categories. Because if you're underspending in management administration, you're underspending in sales and marketing, it's not going to port over very well. So I have to say, like, what should you be spending on those? And you can, like, you know, Paul Dippel's got a bunch of information about this. It's all available, or in peer groups. If you do any of Gary Pica's stuff with Kaseya, Gary was an early mentor of mine with True Methods, with the, what do you call it, the circle, the winner circle, and
Yep.
and the peer groups. Like you can figure out what you should be spending. And if your EBITDA is derived appropriately, it's going to be a lot more valuable to an acquirer. If your EBITDA is like, if you've got very low, let's say, gross margin from operations and just incredibly low sales and marketing and managerial administrative expenses, it's like, well, that's not portable. Like nobody can run your business without any managerial administration on any sales expenses. So what I'm looking for, generally speaking, is somewhere around a 50% labor load to gross margin at a minimum. It's better actually if it's a little higher. That means the direct cost of an engineer to service the revenue is 50 cents at most. I'd even rather have it be 40 cents. That leaves a bunch of headroom to spend on management, administrative, which is something around like I think 12, and sales and marketing should be like another 12, and then all other, so that you're getting at most a 20% EBITDA margin. Because if you're getting a 40% EBITDA margin, it's like impossible for anybody else to make that. And if you're getting 10%, that's okay, because I can look at it and be like, I might be able to be more efficient than them, and there might be some synergies in there. But more than 20% margin, I honestly don't know how to make more than 20%. So I'm going to have to discount the EBITDA, with which is going to be is going to be the core nucleus of any valuation formula, and then you're not going to be happy. So the suggestion would be to really go look at peer group financials and figure out how to get your financials in order such that they're valuable to somebody else. Because like you look at it, be like, I have these cash flows coming to me. It's like, yes, but you work. That's why you have those cash flows. So how much cash flows would be available for somebody if you weren't working and they had to hire that out and then apply appropriate amount? And so that's kind of the thing, is like, know how the numbers should work. And there's people out there for that. Service Leadership with Paul Dipple, the True Methods with Gary, any kind of peer group whatsoever. Get your financials straight such that they look like they're acquirable. And then, obviously, simple things, contracts. So like a lot of small businesses, they don't think about contracts because they have such good they start with these really close relationships with their customers, and that worked. They didn't need contracts. And since the first initial ones were really friendly and didn't need contracts, they never put them in place. And then they go off and they win a whole bunch of others, like letters of engagement and stuff like that. Well, that's okay for you, but if you want your business to be valuable to the next person, it's like, do the work ahead of time and get contracts in place. And then another thing, Mike, I see all the time is like, we haven't done price increases forever. It's like, and I want to sell it to you and have your first impression be to go jack up all the prices of the customers. It's like, that's not going to work. It's like, you're the one with the relationship. You've got the reputational capital. You've got the ownership. You need to go get the price that's the market price for all your clients and then sell. Don't sell it expecting that the new acquirer is going to go and try to bring up all your prices to market. And that's actually true for the people. There's a lot of cases where personnel is clearly underpaid, and they're willing to work at that low pay in this small little community that's really tight knit, where they have dinners with their CEO every so often, and it's just like, it's like they're working with a bunch of buddies. But as soon as that thing transacts, those people want to be paid at market. And that trick doesn't work. I mean, most competent sellers know what market pay is, for talent. And they can go in and they can see like, well, you're underpaying all your people. Like, the first thing I'm going to have to do is go hike up all these salaries. And then whatever EBITDA margin you had is quickly eroded. So there's tricks that small companies do that work for them. I mean, it's like the cash flow is real in their pocket, but it doesn't create a sellable entity to somebody else who's going to professionalize this thing. So the best advice I have is professionalize it while you own it. You can get contracts in play. You can get fair market pricing for your service. And you should really be trying to pay your people fair market pay anyway, because that's the right thing to do as a CEO and leader. So that's something you can really get behind on an altruistic grounds. And then simultaneously, you'll have something that's much more sellable. I mean, and you might not be ready. That might take you a couple of years to have all those conversations and creep your salaries up and do all that stuff. But at least when you get there, you'll be prepared. So when somebody like Endsight or any looks at it, they're like, yeah, there's contracts in play. They have a term. They have price increases embedded in the contract. Employees are at fair market pay. They actually have their salary set such that their managerial expenses are about what it should be for for a revenue of their size. They've got some money that they're spending on sales and marketing, which is driving some new business, so it's creating growth. That's all good. All right, now we can pay, because everybody thinks that they should get these multiples that they hear of transactions. What they're not seeing is that those companies might be doing things very different than them. They might be growing faster. They might have better contracts. They might have better salaries. And so they all want those big multiples that they've heard about in their peer groups, but they haven't developed the business necessary to command that. And so, and that puts them at odds as soon as the first acquirer has to be the person to say, hey, your business isn't an 8 times. It's just not. It might not even be a 5 times. It might be a 3 times EBITDA because of the way that you set these up with no contracts, and your prices are out of whack, and you're, all this kind of stuff. And they don't want to hear that. So, then they don't transact. And because in their head, they had their heart set on some valuation that they heard in the marketplace. You can certainly get that price, but you have to build the business that's worth that to the acquirer. And it's totally possible to build that. It's just, you need to know what it is, what it looks like, and then just go make the decisions to get there.
Well, let's assume that there's somebody out there listening to this, watching us right now, and they are checking all the boxes. How do they get in touch with you, and where should they be? Like, can they be anywhere in the world? Do they have to be in your area? Tell us how they should get in touch with you. And
Well, so if anybody is interested in talking to me, my email address is really noisy. But you could try me there, although you might get into junk. But it's my first initial here, M, and then my last name, which is on the screen if you're watching, Chaput. That's at endsight.net. And we could probably put it somewhere for you to link to it, endsight.net. And you might try to create a subject that really sticks out, like Kaseya podcast or something that's gonna flash my eyes or something like that. And I promise, if I don't respond to you, it's not because I'm not trying to respond. It's because I probably get like 100 solicitations per day, and it's just really noisy, and I'm trying to get it. But you can also work through the Kaseya merger team and ask for some kind of personal introduction. And the answer is, I'm willing to talk to anybody about anything. That's kind of how we started this podcast. It doesn't have to be so that you're trying to sell to me. So if you're in Europe and you want to talk about M&A, you can call me. If you're on the East Coast, even though I'm in California, um, I am super happy to not only talk to you about how to prepare for your M&A, but I know companies in my peer group, and I'm on the board of directors of a roll up on the private equity side that I can refer to it. So any interest at all in just kind of getting more in-depth opinions, I would love nothing more to have a conversation about it. And it doesn't have to be something that I'm personally interested. If you happen to be in California and you're really looking to have more serious conversations, then certainly I'm interested in that too. We're definitely looking to add 1 or 2 or maybe even 3 acquisitions over the next 5 years, depending on the size. And at our size, we're capable of, acquisitions that are, relatively large too. So if you have a more mature practice and you're looking for somebody to take great care of clients and great care of employees and get a fair price for it, or if you're interested in a continuing role, all those things can be discussed. So each seller has, like a unique kind of set of motivations, right? And one of the most important part about doing M&A is really trying to understand how to create what I call the ZOPA, or the zone of profitable agreement. So how do we expand that? Because there's things that you can offer that are very valuable to one side, and easy to give for others. It's not just the price. So an example would be like, some sellers are really bullish about their organization. They're willing to take at risk for a higher price. They have no tolerance for risk. They want all cash. They don't want any risk. It's like, some want to work beyond there, and they need a good job with good people doing work that they love. And some people want to get out immediately. And some people have family members in the business and they're concerned about that. Like you just have to like really think about what the owner wants and how to massage the structure of the agreement to accommodate the maximum amount of wins on both sides. And there's an art to that and some experience to it. And so, the way I approach it is just asking a lot of questions about what people want, what their hopes and ambitions are. And in some cases, it's like, well, you have some work to do before you sell if that's what you want. In some cases, it's like that's totally possible and incredibly fair. Like the guy who came and 30 days later we did a transaction. So it just really depends on the perspective of the seller. I do recommend, highly recommend, if you're thinking about selling in, let's say, a year or two or three, to start having some conversations with prospective buyers early, because you can really understand what you might need to do to maximize, by figuring out, like, it could just be as easy as going and getting all your customers to sign a contract, which you could totally do, but you don't necessarily want to do 1 month before you transact it, because then it's like kind of gross on that part of the client. You could do it, but it's like then as soon as you transact, they know and they just feel like a little bit bad about it. So the earlier you can kind of have some of the conversations and figure out what might be important, I think the better chance you have of getting the most value from the transaction.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Mike. I'll put your contact information in the show notes. So if you are watching this and you want that, go over to the YouTube channel and just go into the description, and his email address will be in there. Can't thank you enough for taking the time out of your very busy day to share with the MSP community. And for everyone watching, we thank you, and tune in every Monday on the Kaseya YouTube channel for another episode of M&A Unpacked. And if you're not yet a member of the M&A Concierge platform for MSPs, make sure to apply today. It's an amazing platform and is 100% free for both buyers and sellers. See you next time, everyone.
Thanks, Mike.